I want to walk you through a couple of different saws today and talk about the characteristics of each of those saws, what they have in common and what is different about them, and why might you want to own one or the other, or perhaps both of them. The saws in question are a scroll saw and a fret saw. This is a fret saw, this is a scroll saw. Now, a scroll saw works by having a blade suspended through the end of two arms, and the end of the arms go up and down and therefore drive the blade through the material, the workpiece. The arms are long with a large gap here so that you can cut curves and turn a large curve piece around the blade. You can set the speed of the up and down motion. Let me turn this saw on. That's a slow speed. And I can increase the speed considerably. This particular saw goes from 500 revolutions or up and down per minute to 1700 per minute. So there's quite a difference. The blade is a very narrow piece of steel with teeth. The teeth are generally close together, very dense. You put the blade into the saw so that the points of the blade are pointing down. That's so that you drive the material on the cutting stroke, which is the down stroke. You're forcing the material into the table, which holds it very steady, which is a very steady platform to hold it. And then when the blade is coming back up, the friction is very much less because it's not cutting, and so it doesn't really tend to lift the workpiece off of the surface of the table. Now, a fret saw, believe it or not, is very similar to this saw, and it's used for the same purpose. The purpose of both of these saws is to be able to cut very tight curves and to follow a very intricate line or pattern when you're cutting. A fret saw is generally used in very thin material for very delicate cuts. If you can get a close-up here of this blade, this is a very, very thin, wispy blade and doesn't amount to much. And it has very dense teeth, but very small teeth. The way I like to set up this particular saw is to have, just like on this saw, to have the teeth of the blade pointing downward. The other thing you can do is you can control the tension on this blade, and you can turn it so that the teeth point straight forward or point in any direction relative to the framework of the saw. And this is handy in following curves and in making sure that this mouth of the fret saw frame does not get in the way of making the cut. This particular saw requires very little skill, comparatively speaking, to operate it. You simply mark the material with, say, a pencil mark of the curve you want to cut, and then by varying the rate at which you turn the material and at which you push the material through the saw blade, you follow that line. And you learn very quickly how to do that, and what speed to go and how much pressure to put on it and how rapidly to turn it depending on the curve. This saw requires more skill to operate, to use, because you have to provide the up and down motion. That is not particularly difficult in terms of brute strength. It cuts pretty easily, but it is somewhat difficult to keep the geometry of the saw and the blade relative to the workpiece correct at all times. And that would in general be perfectly vertical to the surface that you are cutting. And at the same time, you have to turn this while you are doing the up and down motion in the same plane in order to follow the particular line of the cut. So it requires some practice. It requires some skill to use. So this saw is easy to use. This saw is more difficult to use. This particular saw costs more money. The starting price of this saw is around $100. You can also spend $300 or $400 or much more, $300 or $400 or much more on this saw, depending on how high a quality you want and how quiet and how efficient you want it to be. This particular saw is lightweight and has a rather extensive frame, so it's probably a $50 saw, but it doesn't take up a lot of space in your shop. So if you've enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to our channel so that we can keep you informed.